I met these three gentlemen last night, this morning. Clay Parikh, professional hacker, including ES&S. As a hacker, he's worked in election testing lab, dealing with many voting systems, including ES&S, which we use in Texas. As a successful hacker with master's degree in cybersecurity, and subcontracted within major government agencies. Clint Curtis is a Democrat. He was a Republican until he saw the Republicans stealing elections. He turned Democrat. Ran as a Democrat for office. American attorney, computer programmer, ex-NASA employee. The Speaker of the House of Florida at the time admits that elections can indeed be fixed and it would be undetectable. So he worked, and the Speaker of the House hired him to fix elections, and he knows, he's testified under oath that he rigged computer results for then Congressman Tom Feeney, the former Speaker of the Florida House of Representatives. And Walter is nationally recognized computer expert, senior lecturer emeritus in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at Texas A&M University, and co-author of Mesa Report number 3 and a native Texan. So gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks very much. It's great to be with you. Before I start the presentation, I want to give a shout out to Senator Hall from Senator Wendy Rogers in Arizona. Yesterday was the first hearing of the new election committee in the Arizona Senate. So in prior sessions, elections have been under the government committee, but they established a new committee for election committee in the Arizona Senate. Wendy Rogers is the chair. Senator Bennett is the vice chair. Sonny Borelli is on the committee. And their first hearing that they had yesterday was primarily testimony from, write this down, WeThePeopleAZAlliance.com. WeThePeopleAZAlliance.com. And so their group has been looking at mismatched signatures. So in the 2020 election, on the ballots for requesting absentee ballots, you have to basically sign an affidavit that you are a legal voter and are requesting it, and here's your signature. There is a standard by the Secretary of State as to what constitutes a valid signature, how many points have to match, because nobody's signature is identical. You write your signature down 10 times, and if you look closely enough, there'll be minor variations. But when the voter registration card says Susie Smith and the signature says John Jones, there's no way, by any stretch of the imagination, that anybody on earth could count that as a match. And yet they did for hundreds of thousands of ballots in 2020. So they took the percentage of mismatches in 2020 and said, how many mismatches would that mean in 2022? And so they came up with a number and said, this is how many mismatches there would be. And then I did the statistical limit calculations. And at 99.99% confidence, there are more mismatched signatures in 2022, more than 7 times as many mismatched signatures as the margin of victory, which was 17,000 votes. So there are hundreds of thousands of mismatched signatures that were counted. The other points that were made in the testimony, you may have heard about the 19-inch ballots. So what happened was they had more questions, water bonds or whatever, that made the ballot not fit on the 19-inch ballot they had used before, so they went to a 20-inch ballot. But many of the ballots were printed by taking a 20-inch image, shrinking it by 5% to 19 inches, and then centering it and printing it on a full-size 20-inch ballot. So to the naked eye, it looks like a ballot, because 5% difference isn't very much. But then it won't scan and it gets rejected. And you're going to hear a lot about that from Clay, because he actually got to see some of those ballots as an official inspector. The other problem was blotchy printing, because you know how a laser printer works is it puts dots of toner on the paper and then heats it and melts it into the paper. But if you have thick paper or envelopes or something like that, you've got to turn up the temperature. So the printer should have been set on heavy, because the ballots are supposed to be 80 or 100 pound paper. ordinary printing paper is 20 pounds. So like 4 or 5 times as thick as a regular piece of paper. A lot of the printers were not set to heavy. They said, oh, well, send a technician out, turn it up to heavy, and that will fix the blotchy printing that makes the ballot unscannable. No, it didn't fix it. And the end result is that when we looked at the system logs for the entire course of election day, there were over 7,000 ballot rejections every 30 minutes for the entire day. So the county said this was a minor problem and it was quickly fixed. It was not a minor problem and it was not quickly fixed. And the last testimony from the Arizona Senate hearing yesterday was about the inconsistent cast vote record. So about 1/5 of the voting centers are not listed in the cast vote record. These are voting centers where ballots were tabulated, the results were stored on the memory cards, but they did not use the memory cards to load the CVR. They said they rescanned the ballots at central count. So that's an inconsistency that needs to be resolved. So that's the report from Arizona. They beat you by 1 day, but Senator Hall is on the march here, and we appreciate his doing that very much. So, now let me show you a 4-minute video about why voting machines must go. Compare that to counting paper ballots. With paper ballots, one ballot at a time is removed from the box, examined by the clerk in the presence of observers and election judges from both parties, and the contests recorded. But with voting machines, votes go in and numbers come out, and you have no idea what happened in between. Was the vote counted, ignored, flipped, deleted? You have no idea. But numbers do come out of the machine. That's not transparent. So voting machines must go because they are not transparent. Voting machines must go because they are not accurate. Over and over again, we've seen voting machines accept and count counterfeit ballots. In Maricopa County, Arizona, it was ballots which were not on the required special paper. The 80 or 100-pound stock from Roland printer in Canada called Vote Secure paper with an embedded ghost tag in it. But even ballots which were not on this required special paper were accepted and counted anyway. In Alabama, it was machines just like those in Pima County, Arizona, which accepted and counted Xeroxed ballots. So voting machines must go because they are not accurate. Voting machines must go because they are not accountable. To my knowledge, there has never been an independent review of voting machine source code in this country. The Libertarian Party in North Carolina did exercise their legal right to have their computer expert review the voting machine source code. But to date, the State Board of Elections there has not made it possible for him to do so. So voting machines must go because they are not accountable. Voting machines must go because their hardware is vulnerable. Voting machines are basically computers, and most, if not all, computer hardware is made in China. The Department of Defense has found hardware spying devices on PC motherboards, keyboards, network connectors, etc. So voting machines must go because their hardware is vulnerable. Voting machines must go because their software is vulnerable. Arizona voting machines use Windows 10, but minus all the critical security patches and other patches which Microsoft issues monthly. Arizona voting machines also do not have up-to-date antivirus definitions. So voting machines must go because their software is vulnerable. Voting machines must go because their network is vulnerable. Because CIS requires that they be allowed to connect from the internet through the firewall into the local network, the voting machines on the local network are vulnerable. Also, many voting machines contain Wi-Fi or Bluetooth or wireless modems which connect to outside networks. So voting machines must go because their network is vulnerable. And for all these reasons, that is why voting machines must go. Thank you. The key points are we want a system that is transparent, accurate, and accountable. And if it's those three things, it will also be auditable. And now, Clint? Clay, who's next? Yes, Clay, why don't you follow up on this?
Well, I'm just part of the panel. I'll answer any questions, but what I will tell you is what I just told Mark was that, hey, those were some pretty good parlor tricks, because in my field, I know y'all are oohing and awing, but those were simple parlor tricks. That's how bad these systems are, and it's not just ES&S, it's Dominion. I spent 9 years in the voting system test labs, and there's not a vendor around that has a system. I know y'all got Conic, and I've heard Hart and everything else in this system. They're all horrible. It's very easy. And the vulnerabilities he said about 2014 is true. I've looked at the reports since I've started doing this. I stopped in 2017. I was tested in 2014. Those same vulnerabilities are there. They don't update the applications. The quick short story, our great state of Alabama and the Secretary of State, John Merrill, well, former Secretary of State, gave every county in Alabama a new hardened EMS laptop. I had a probate judge that was concerned about his county, asked me to come down. I looked, asked some questions, terrified him to death, and he showed me this. Then I had him walk through it, and he didn't know what he was looking at. But just to tell you, those new hardened laptops that were done for security reasons, the Windows 10 version that was on them had end of life, had expired. In other words, Microsoft no longer supported it a year before the systems were built. My conservative estimate, based on just the operating system and the database, which was very vulnerable, was 330 vulnerabilities. And not only you saw a remote demonstration, they do not have to be remote. The stuff that Mark told you about the database, not even having to be an admin on it, believe me, these systems can be accessed. You could, what's called, elevate your privileges and become an admin on the database. And so I'm just telling you, they are just that bad. And what you were just shown, in my opinion, were some pretty good parlor tricks, and that have been around forever. So my best advice to you is you need to let other people know what you saw today.
Hi, folks. How many Republicans we got in here? Whoa, lots of them. How many Democrats? That's my wife. Don't hurt her. You guys are late to the party. I wrote this program way back in 2000, 22 years ago, and testified before Congress on it in 2004. If you look for the video, you'll see that. And I actually testified in Texas when they were switching to, I think it was Hart InterCivic. That's probably almost 20 years ago too. And yet the problem's still here, and the problem will always be here if you let computers do anything in your system. because you cannot stop the programmer. The programmer owns it. We make the universe. You do not get any images, you do not get any logs, you do not get any databases unless the programmer puts it in there. And anything I put in there can be fixed. And it just doesn't have to be fixed by the program, it can be fixed by outside sources, it can be fixed by software that's in the hardware. You just can't trust it because you will never be able to see it. And no matter how hard you work at it, you won't be the smartest guy in the room because the other guy owns the universe. He is the God, and he'll just change it. So you start looking at a log and you catch them, that log will not be there next time. You look at a valid image and you go, I got valid images. There are no valid images. I write the image and then I give it to you. If I want to write it differently than it is, no problem. It's just dots on paper to me, okay? So that's the way it works. You've got to get them out of it. You've got to go hand count, and that's the only way you can do it. Any questions?
Yeah, I've got a question. All right, three of you. You teach computer science and engineering. You hack computers, and you studied voting systems and a master's degree in cybersecurity, and you've got a programming background. Are you Luddites? You want to get rid of computers?
In voting, yes.
No, exactly. The point is that these are three gentlemen who love computers, have dedicated their life to computers, but they say they don't belong in the voting process. And I think that's really important. When they say we need to go back to paper ballots, they're not speaking of someone who wants to get rid of computers. They're not Amish that are riding in buggies. They love computers. They just say the reason is, the very reasons you love computers is you can program them, is the very reason we can't allow them to be used in the election system. Am I correct?
They will do whatever you tell them to do. They have no morals. They have no values. They're not Republican and Democrat. They will tell you whatever you tell to do, that's what it will do. And the last guy will win. So if I have a perfect system and someone comes in and says, I want Fred to win, Fred's going to win. Nothing I can do about it and no way to check it. Because everything will rewrite itself.
Okay.
So he said that the programmer can fix anything. So this is a race from the Democrat primary this year. And the voter was at a county that had Hart Intercivic, and they chose for the candidate, Democrat candidate for Attorney General of Texas, Joe Jaworski. They punched that key and said print ballot, and here's the ballot that it printed. And they took it over and put it in the scanner. What do you think the scanner read? Did the scanner read the words at the bottom that you verified were your choice? No, the scanner read the QR code. Who has a QR code reader on your phone? Turn it sideways. Turn it sideways. Take a picture of that and tell me what the QR code says. It worked better sideways, man. There you go. Who's got it? Raise your hand. All right, tell us. But I voted for Joe Jaworski.
And it doesn't even have to be on the barcode. You can send me anything, because if I'm in the scanner, I'll write whatever I feel like. I'll count it any way I feel like. It doesn't matter. Nothing's real in programming. It's all illusion. It's all little dots that we make you think are happening. That's what's real.
Mike.
Okay, so what we have, again, I want to point out to the panelists, we have a gentleman here who wrote code to change elections. We have a gentleman here who was hired, whose professional career involved evaluating and testing machines to see if they were safe. And a gentleman here who's an expert in computer science across the board. All patriots, all want to see a fair and honest election. Different political parties. I don't know your party affiliation, but I know Democrat. What is your party affiliation?
Unfortunately, we're
Okay, but the point is it's not a partisan issue, it's a computer issue. That's the bottom line that you need to take from this. All right, talk about what it was like when you were testing systems. tell us a little, I heard some of this last night, and it shocked me, because you want this person testing to look at everything to make sure it's not vulnerable, right? That's what you expect. What did you actually get to do?
I didn't get to do anything. What I am going to tell you is, as somebody who, I've played bad guy for the government, I'm a cybersecurity professional. I was a fan of this gentleman long before I started testing voting systems, because what he did over 2 decades ago, right, was just phenomenal. And the key point I want to get into is, hopefully he'll show the demo here soon. And every time you touch that touch screen, you have to see the source code. He said this, and it's true. When I went into voting system test labs and I was to test these things, I said, I need to see the source code. They said, no, you're not allowed to do that. And so how do you do a test on a touch system when that? I did some physical access things. I pushed my finger around all over the screen. But if you're good, you're not going to see it. Now, he'll show you what you can see, right? Just because he's teaching. But the real guy's not going to let you know about it. And these are the things I was told. And that beloved DS200, we use it in Alabama. I slide my ballot into it all the time, except for the last time, because I used our accessible voting systems, because there's a gentleman here in Texas that's written code to evaluate, right? And I wanted to do that. My wife, we can take a photograph in Alabama. As long as it's you and your ballot, you're allowed to do that. I did it on the accessible, took it. My wife voted regular, so we got the same precinct. Sent it out here to John, or to Todd. He evaluated it. Out of my 33 votes cast, he could read 31. 2 couldn't be read. And if I wasn't so busy, I would personally like to follow up, but Texas is just one stop in the many, right, of supporting the states. But back on to the voting systems test labs. From day one, I asked, how do you review the source code? They say, oh, we do that, but where's the security test done on the source code? They don't do that. Since I've been involved with this, I found out the very first voting system test labs was Wiley Laboratories, and they're a good laboratory. They're now NTS, and they don't do voting system stuff anymore. They lied to me. They outsourced it to a third party to evaluate. Who knows who the third party was? I don't. I've signed non-disclosure agreements the same as that company would to evaluate the source code. They only look at percentages of it. I cannot count the number of times to where I got into a system and then was told stop. The fortunate thing about Mark, and I sort of ribbed him last night because he said he's going to take 40 minutes. I said, 40 minutes? I mean, I'm 5, 10 minutes, 2.5 minutes was my best times, right? But yeah, yeah. All right, so
He left an important part out. As part of his job working for the testing lab, he tried to hack into the machines. How long did it take you to hack into a voting system you were testing?
best time's 2.5 minutes around that. One time, because the graphics card did not work and I couldn't remember some of my Linux commands, so so it took me the extra 2.5 minutes. But usually on average, 5 to 10 minutes. What systems do you use here? Yeah, guess what? ES&S a whole lot of times I got in, right? And so I'm just telling you that. Whenever I got in, though, I could not do what a good security professional did. Like Mark showing you how he flipped the votes. I would be stopped. No, you can't break the config, and that's improper from a security standpoint, from a testing standpoint. Because how do you fix the vulnerabilities if you don't know what all they are? And so you need to realize that. This starts from the top with the voting system guidelines, and it goes with the voting system test labs. They're stamping them, but they're rubber stamping them. You want to go now? Or?
Well, I've got two questions involved in that. Both were revolving around source code, because you mentioned source code. it seems to me that counting should not be that complex of a source code. That seems like that should be proved. So I'd like your comments on that. And the second thing is, why in the world would you not show your source code? Why would you prevent people? Because this is the people's system. It determines our future. Why can't we see it? So if you address those two questions.
All right. I think I'll go first to give them a little bit of time with the program. Here's the thing. Voting systems, what do? They count. 1 plus 1 is 2. Add another one, that's 3. Hey, come on, I just lost some of them. Marine County, come on. I don't have to take my shoes off. No. So what I'm getting at is it doesn't take much. Now, if you're not a programmer, you don't understand it, but that's what so impressed me with what he did, because it's the amount of line of codes, and he did more than just flip the votes. He cleaned his logs up. And here's what I'm going to tell you. They have millions of line of code in these voting systems. The voting system test labs only test the percentages of what's changed. They don't even do that. I work in the DoD environment. I'm currently on the Missile Defense Agency program. I have looked at a lot of source code on that. Now, there are some components for weapon systems that are hundreds of thousands of lines, but never in the millions. That's for a weapon system. This is just counting, adding, addition. So let that sink in. What else is in that code?
That's lines of code longer than a omnibus spending bill, right? That's long.
Yeah, let me share a story too of how Clint Curtis first came to my attention. As he said, he did this, and he'll tell the story in 2000, but it became public in 2004 in his congressional testimony, and I saw that news article. So this was about 2 years ago when you suddenly came back on my radar.
Thank Mike Lindell for that.
He did. So 2004, I saw the news article that said that a politician had asked a programmer if he could write a program to flip a 49-51 election to a 51-49. And that was all the article said. But, you know, I'm a programmer, and I said, how would I do that? And it took me about 15 seconds to come up with a way to do that. I would add one line of code that said, if login name ends with a space, switch the candidates. So now I log in as Walter, election is going on, my guy is not winning. I say, I need a break to go get a drink. I log off, I come back in and I type Walter space. And that one line of code flips the candidates. You could be standing there looking over my shoulder. You could be taking a video of the screen, and you would see that my login name was Walter. You would never see the Walter space. It would only take me one line of code. So I took the challenge that the politician gave him and solved it with one line of code. As Clay said, he was a little more thorough about it, and now he'll tell you.
Yeah, I mean, you can do anything you can think of that you want to make it happen, you can make it happen. You can make it flip when it hits 100,000 votes. You can make it flip when it's Tuesday. You can make it flip any way you want to make it flip. You can think of it, I can make it happen. You know, it's just that simple. Here's how we did the flip in this one. And like he said, how do you do the math for adding? You take the total of what the guy has and you add 1. And that becomes the new total. And then if you want to add another one, you take that total and you add 1. So you really have 2 lines of code, generally, to make that one happen. For the flip, basically what I did, because it's just a prototype, I could figure out anything I wanted, Beanie goes, you know, this kind of thing. And so basically what I did is if you click the R in the program, you know, because you want a Republican to win, then you just hit the R and you hit a little hidden spot on the screen, or you could do it with any flag at all. Anything can make it happen. But you tell it which one you want to win, and then it makes that one have 51 to 49. You probably want to do it near the end in case you have a big flux of people coming in, but you could do it anytime, so it's going to be off. And when I first wrote this, I'm thinking you'd be crazy to let anybody use a computer in an election. Because who's that stupid, right? We all have viruses, we've all had computers, and we know they stink, right? You know, they just do. They work okay, and then they'll mess up, and there's no way to fix them because you know what's going on inside. So who would let that be in an election by the other side? We don't trust each other, right? We all know that our team is the good team and the other team's the bad team. That's obvious. You know, just like putting on a Cowboys hat. Well, now you're a Cowboys fan and everyone else is terrible, even if you were a Cleveland fan before. Yeah. So it's the way it works, and that's the way it all works. So who would do that? Well, we did. And we paid to have it done, and then we gave these companies basically the ability to do anything they want and have no oversight at all. We're not going to make them show the source code. We're not going to make them blueprint their system. We're not going to do any of that. Because even if you see the source code, that's not enough. Right? Because code's also in all the hardware. Code's also in the firmware. The code also has to be blueprinted, because I did a lot of blueprinting for companies where you go around and the company hires somebody and they do the code, and then when they have to hand it off the company, they're supposed to do a knowledge transfer. But 85% of the time, the code they handed the company was not the code the company was running. Not even close. And this is in a commercial market. Fortune 500 companies, not Joe Schlunk. I'm talking, you know, I paid you $5 million to build this program, and now you give me source code that doesn't really match. And it happens all the time. And the only way you can find that is a binary. And what happens with these companies is not only do they do it that way, then they'll come and they'll update you right before the election. So now everything you did know, you don't know anymore. You know, kind of like when Microsoft updates you and now everything's moved. How do you think that happened? Because everything's moved, because nothing is the same. The programmer owns it. And unless you trust them implicitly, never trust a programmer implicitly, then you're in trouble. You're in trouble. We're all nuts with it.
So you've got multiple million lines of code. You could take a very small piece of code and have that anywhere in those multiple million lines of code, and you couldn't find it. But even if you could find it, you're not allowed to look. That's the bottom line. This is what we're looking at, and it's by contract, by private contract that you all didn't have a say in, that determines that we can't look at that because that's proprietary. I don't understand what's so proprietary about software that should be as basic as a pocket calculator 50 years ago.
And it doesn't even have to be in that program. It can be a module on the side that once it activates, eats itself so you won't find it afterwards.
Or it could be in that little flash drive that he put in, or anything else.
It could be anything.
So I have a question for the audience. How does the state pay for the contract? The state goes to work and makes money, right? Or who does it? So if you buy something, shouldn't you have the right to look at it?
Here's the actual program if you want to see it. Right now, okay, what I want to accomplish, I click a little R on mine, and then I push this. This is when we were trying to get to the touch screen. Because before we got them paper ballots, which I thought was going to be the achievement, and then, well, in Florida, we got rid of the paper ballots, and 2 months later they said, well, we're not going to give you a paper ballot, but now you have to send them to a scanner, and it's illegal to count them by hand. It probably is in Texas too. Probably is in Texas. You cannot count those by hand. You must do all your recounts through the scanner. That's the way it's Florida. Anyway, so Democrats winning. I want to go to the R on the bottom, and my Republicans winning. That's a little prototype.
Just so you saw that, he clicked the R in the word president up at the top. That's what sent the code through. He clicked the R and it flip-flopped. Who was winning? Is that correct?
The Democrats. I'm going to flip it back.
But have you noticed that election integrity of machines are only a concern to the party that's not in power? Have you noticed how that flipped? Because up until the 2020 election, you could see every major Democrat politician railing against the risk of machines. But now you see all the Republicans concerned about it. It flips because the problem is that we become so party affiliated that we more worry about whether or not our party's in power than whether or not we the people are in power. And that's the real magic trick, is that instead of worrying about what the Constitution says and what we the people want, we more worry about whether it's an R or a D.
And here's what I'm going to tell you, and why I said reluctantly a Republican, because the Republicans are cheating in Alabama.
Right.
And the thing is, it's not the conservative ones, the ones the people want. And yet our own party down there, oh, we're happy we're red. And believe me, I tell people like it is. I said, yeah, but we're communist red. We're not conservative Republican red. And that's what I'm telling you. It is not a party. That's what they want you to do. They want us to bicker between Democrat and Republican. It's a uniparty. It's a few people that want to control our freedom.
Would you dare use the term deep state, anything like that?
Deep state, swamp, whatever you want to call it, yes.
So more about software. Question, yes.
You are a poll watcher, and you're in the polls, have the freedom to walk around, so forth. What are the telltale signs of such fraud taking place of this nature? Not just scenarios where it's an all red or all blue area and there's nothing really that much to worry about. But it's most places, how can you, what can you start looking for? Are you thinking about looking for?
The specifics are going to vary from place to place, but the number one thing I would look for is what do they not want you to look at.
Yeah.
So in Atlanta, was it Atlanta, the State Farm Arena?
Yeah.
Okay, it was, don't look under the table that has the black skirts around it. In other places, like the previous speakers showed, it was, don't look at the back of the machine to see if it has seals on it. In Michigan, Pat Colbeck, who was a state senator but is an IT professional as well, went up to one of the election workers and said, is this connected to the internet? And the guy said, no. And he said, are you sure? And he said, yes. And it was a Windows operating system. He said, well, would you move your mouse over the network icon in the lower right-hand corner to show the networks? And the guy said, no. So that would be my best generic advice, is whatever they don't want you to see, that's what you need to take a look at.
Hey, and here's, I'll tell you what I did in Alabama, because my wife and I went to a Focus on America group because of the COVID stuff, and that's how we got involved. Then the election stuff started popping up, and the very first thing they did is they had concerns, and they had a lot of people. They said, hey, go be a poll watcher, go observe, go work at the polls. Now, well, I'm at the point I really don't care. I have OTDPs. Everything that Mark showed you about where the security seal should be, I've got that from their documentation. I took some of those photos, I gave it to them. I told them the things to look. I even told, after the summit, one of the ladies that's part of this organization, hey, scan the Wi-Fi's. There are apps you can put on your phone. I gave that organization, and they spread it out, right? Because that's what you have to do. You have to learn. In Alabama, they don't educate the voter. Now, there are, as a security professional, I'm going to tell you, there's some things as a user from a security standpoint you cannot know because there's insider threats. But there are simple things that voters should know. You should know that those ties are on those bins, that those seals are supposed to be there. You do not know what it was like for me to spend 9 years of voting and going into my precinct and seeing that the city and the county didn't have that system, as I knew even the cheesy vendors said to have it. And that's just because they do not know. And so that's how we addressed it in my county. I had to let them share that out. You have people here, you have this organization. Now, my stuff's dated, but believe me, you get involved with these type of organizations and you get active and you ask them, because they have reached back. I mean, that's why an Alabamian sitting up here in the Texas Capitol, you know. So.
A polling site next door to schools and libraries where there are numerous computers, that's major vulnerability.
They're being a little more optimistic than me. There is nothing you can do. You won't see a thing that I do. You won't know it's coming. Supervisor election, you'd be looking over my shoulder and won't see a thing. It just, if I hadn't told you how the program run, because you don't see those totals flipping, you would have seen me voting for a person and walking away. And that's all you would ever see, as straight as anything else. If the code's embedded so it doesn't take any sort of interaction, you wouldn't even see that. And unless you can see things in a nanosecond, because that's how quick it happens, I can change an entire database while you're blinking. And so you're not going to see anything. You might catch people doing illegal things, you know, normal people, but you will never catch the computer doing illegal things, which is why you can't have the computer, is because you can't watch it. It's going to be faster than you, it's going to be quicker than you, it's locked away so you can't even check it, though it would be hard even if you could. You just got to get rid of them. So there's nothing you can do. But thank you for watching a poll anyway. But you can't watch me.
Yeah. Hey, here's what I want to say though. He's 1,000% correct. But here's what I'm telling you. They have got, I've known this, well, besides seeing what he did, I've known this since 2008. And I'm telling you, in 2020, November 3rd, when the numbers froze, everything that I knew, and I've discussed this with professors when I was doing my cyber, and they stepped on the wrong path because everybody said Russia and outside state. You can't hit these things externally across the system because we have Dominion, ES and S, they're all different. It's going to come from the inside. And I'm telling you, that's what I knew it was, but they are so blatantly sloppy. You can get stuff, and if you put pressure, you say, hey, I noticed this, this, and this, and you attack them at your county level, you might get to the point to where we get to look inside them. And so, yeah, I'm a little optimistic, but again, I'm a Marine. You take my arms and legs away, I'm going to bite your Achilles tendon. and that's the way you have to be about it. This is for your freedom, for your children's freedom. You know what I'm saying? We are that city on the hill. This nation is literally that, and you cannot give it up. So, yeah, he's 1,000% correct, but you got to fight. You got to fight with everything you've got.
Well, Clint is absolutely right that he can write something that you would never detect. And he said that it can't be detected. There's one case where it was detected, and that was Mesa County, Colorado. And so let me tell you a brief summary of that. So if you haven't read it, look up Mesa Report number 3. So there were 3 reports. The first 2, the previous speaker described about hacking into the database and flipping quotes. But Mesa Report number 3 was one that Jeffrey O'Donnell and I did on the forensic disk images that Tina Peters, the county clerk and recorder, made in Colorado. So the brief story is that as they do before every election, the vendor, in this case Dominion is statewide in Colorado, said we need to come in and update the software. And she asked, is this going to erase anything? And they said, yes, we wiped the disk clean and put a new image in. Well, this was in May of 2021, and it hadn't been 22 months, which the federal law requires that election records be preserved. Her title, her office that she was elected for, is county clerk and recorder. So it is her legal duty to preserve records of elections. Under federal law, for a minimum of 22 months, Colorado's state law is even stricter and requires 25 months. So she said, you are not touching my machines until I make a backup. why would you not want someone to make a backup? Think about it. Would you keep your money in a bank that didn't make a backup every night? Of course not. So she made a backup. Well, they came in, installed the new software, and then she made another backup. So we have 2 snapshots of that machine. So we have the way it was toward the end of May 2021, and then a few days later, I think it was also in May, after the new software had been installed. So then Jeffrey O'Donnell, who's a database expert, looked at the image to see what was in the databases. And of course, as was pointed out, many of these manuals are available, so the Colorado Secretary of State posts the Dominion manuals online for the benefit of the election workers. So if you want to know how your machines work in Colorado, you just go to the Secretary of State's website and read the manuals. And here on the left half of this picture is what the Dominion manuals say is in the machine. This is what they say is in the server. So up at the top, ballots come in. So ballots are scanned. And let me move this down where I can do both. So the ballots that are scanned, they take a picture of it. So they take a picture, and as Clint pointed out, the computer can alter pictures. So, but that's another story. But the short answer is yes, the picture of the ballot can be altered before it is interpreted to see who it voted for. But let's just say it wasn't. So he took a picture, and he goes into the tabulation database. So think of this as an inbox. So you've got ballots, and then pictures are taken of the ballots, and then those pictures are put in the inbox. There's a process that's watching the inbox that says, do you have any work for me? And when it sees something in the inbox, then it says, all right, figure out how this ballot voted. And so it uses the XY coordinates of where the bubble is on the screen, looks to see how filled in the bubble is, if they filled in 2 bubbles, or all of those things. And if the machine can figure out how they voted, it records it and runs this extremely complicated line of code that says, add 1 to that candidate's total. If the machine can't figure it out, so let's say the person voting made a mark in the first bubble and then said, oh no, I meant to mark the other one, and put something in the second bubble, and so there are black marks in both bubbles. There are thresholds to say what to ignore. So the standard configuration threshold for this particular machine is if the bubble is less than 14% black, ignore it. That's a stray mark. And if it's more than 35% black, count it. That's the one they intended to mark. But suppose somebody filled in both bubbles 20%. Then the machine says, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if this is a stray mark, a vote, or a double vote. So you have 2 types of adjudication. And adjudication has an ordinary English meaning that says to decide what the outcome was. So so-and-so was adjudicated the winner of the 100-meter race. But it has a technical meaning in elections, which is determining how the voter intended to vote. And so if the machine can figure out which person you voted for by the bubbles, that one is enough filled in and the other one is enough blank, that it knows who you voted for, it just does it. If it can't figure it out, it kicks it out to a human. And the human has to look at it and either say they meant to vote for A or they meant to vote for B, or the bubbles were close enough to being the same black, it's an overvote, don't count this race but count the rest of it. So adjudication is done automatically if it's unambiguous, with human intervention if it's ambiguous. And then those adjudicated results are added to the totals in the main election database at the bottom. At the end of the election, close the polls, print out the results. This is what Dominion says is in the server. Here's what Mesa Report 3 shows that we found inside the server. Sorry, wrong window. What was actually in the server was not one but two tabulation databases, and not one but two adjudication databases. So the two databases, look at the right-hand half of this picture. So the two databases on the left of those red arrows, those are the ones that are supposed to be there. So ballots came into the tabulation database, they were adjudicated either by machine or with human assistance. After about a fourth of the ballots had been counted, so remember Clint's suggestion that there might be some criterion as to when to do things. After about a fourth of the ballots were counted, suddenly a second tabulation database and a second adjudication database were created, and some but not all of the ballots were transferred to the new set of databases. This effectively makes the ballots that were not transferred from the first database invisible. So if the election worker had said, I want to see ballot number 373, this would be like taking a spreadsheet and hiding 5,000 rows. All the rows below move up. And now the row 373 that you're looking at is not the real row 373 because they didn't copy those rows to the new database. The end result is then, after re-adjudication, goes into the main election database. Exactly the same thing happened. This happened in November 2020. Exactly the same thing happened in April of 2021 in the Grand Junction municipal election. So since the county owns the equipment, they run the election for city council for the city of Grand Junction. After about a fourth of the votes were counted, a second set of databases was created. Some but not all of the ballots were transferred. The end result in April of 2021 is that the councilman who won by a margin of 3,000 votes, where 8,000 votes are in question. So if you won by 3,000 plus or minus 8,000, you have no idea who won. So this is the first case that I know of that we actually saw what happened during an election. Follow up on that.
I thought that.